talking about Commissioner Brett Yormark. Obviously, he is entering year two as commissioner of the Big 12, and a lot of innovation. That's the word that kind of seems to be synonymous with Brett Yormark when it comes to being commissioner of the Big 12. What stood out to you about anything he might have said during media day?
I think, I mean, what you get from him is that he's really ambitious, um, and that he really wants to move things forward. And he was talking about connecting with Gen Z. The Big 12 Mexico thing is a pretty big deal, especially with Houston in basketball doing it against Kansas. Um, and one of the things that sort of stood out, and one of the things he was asked about, was his experience in professional sports. And it does seem like he's sort of bringing that sort of marketing plan, things like that, and those sort of initiatives over to the Big 12. And he also, of course, with expansion period, expansion is such a big deal. He did mention that they do have a plan about expansion, but really didn't go into it further than that.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely, Starns. Commissioner Yormark has been saying that for a while now when it comes to expansion. The phrase that became popular during the course of last season was open for business. And Starnes, to your point, he did kind of go into, not detail, but he mentioned how he brought it up again. Open for business for the Big 12 doesn't necessarily mean they're looking for expansion to expand tomorrow. It's to be able to do what's best for the conference. And the word he used specifically, what adds the most value to the members as a whole, specifically when it comes to potential expansion regarding the Big 12. Now, Starnes, you were there, obviously, the elephant in the room, Texas and OU, with them departing. How much of a big deal, how much of a storyline was that during Big 12 Media Day?
It was oddly sort of muted in some way. I mean, there were people asking about it, asking the coaches about what it would be like playing against them, asking Steve Sarkisian, what it would be like, and also Brett Yormark. But it seemed like, at least in Yormark's perspective, of course, losing your two biggest brands is a huge deal. But it seems that everybody's confident that the Big 12 is still going to be a top tier conference. They're still going to go forward. They're still going to get better. And that sort of seems to be what the sentiment was at Big 12 Media Day.
One of the things that stood out to me that he talked about was, not only did he say it's one of the best times to be part of the Big 12, but he acknowledged how OU and Texas have national brands that, kind of speaks for themselves. But I think it was a question asked to him about how he felt about allowing ADs and getting the input from ADs about creating new rivalries and embracing, like, for example, Houston TCU, or Houston Texas Tech, just different rivalries that will come to fruition that they can really brand those matchups and get into, I guess, national rivalries per se. So that was one of the things that really stood out to me when he kind of talked about bringing new rivals and kind of creating new traditions with some of the new additions to the teams.
Kevin Josso on YouTube dropped a wrestling promo right there. Yormark is snapping necks and cashing checks for the Big 12 conference. And that's an interesting point, Dayon, specifically about new rivalries. I think if we're localizing it specifically to Houston. I think, I'll toss this question out there because I'm curious to get you guys' thoughts on it. But I most definitely think that Texas Tech is kind of, you could pencil them in as the top rivalry in the Big 12 once OU and Texas leave, specifically because of the recent history that they already have. They've, for the most part, already played on a regular, obviously not every season, but it seems like very frequently that those two programs have met. And obviously, specifically from a Houston perspective, Texas Tech has come away with the better side of things for the last few meetings. But just look at last season, how crazy that game was, and it went to overtime, and there's been a lot of transfers from Tech to Houston, and that's something to add to it as well. What school in Texas do you think could potentially overtake that big rivalry in the coming seasons?
I think Baylor, being the program that it has under Dave Aranda, is a pretty big one. TCU, just I mean, based on last year alone, it's going to be such a huge deal if they continue that success under Sonny Dykes. I mean, those teams to me really stand out, and of course, Texas Tech with the history, just the recent history, is always going to be there. And I believe U of H will go to Waco this year, or go to Lubbock this year, which they did last year as well.
They go to Waco as well, I believe.
They go to Waco, and then TCU and Texas come to
Our
Houston.
home. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know, in terms of, U of H Texas Tech rivalry, I don't know how much it'll be felt that first year in Lubbock. I think when it comes back to TDECU, next year or in the future, I think that's when we'll really get a gauge of really how big it is.
Yeah, I agree with you, Starns. I think Baylor is a school that I can see overcoming the kind of the Texas Tech rivalry. I could see TCU, like you said, if they continue to hold on to some of the success that they had. And there's history between of their coach, Sonny Dykes, and Dana Holgorsen as well. So I think that could be where Baylor sticks out to me 100%. I agree with that wholeheartedly, not only with football, but I think basketball as well.
Big Jack 512 says UH versus Texas Tech all time is 18-15-1. So very similar when it comes to that rivalry. Joe Mendez brought up Baylor, the COVID non-game in Waco in 2020. That definitely added some fuel to what has relatively been a dormant fire over the last few years. With the UH football equipment truck already in Waco before that game got canceled, and we know about Dana Holgorsen's tweet shortly thereafter. But kind of going back to Brett Yormark, specifically when it comes to Houston, one of the things he said whenever he was speaking yesterday on Wednesday during media day, he called Houston a top 10 market, and he said it's critically important for the conference to be able to have that Houston market. And specifically, Starns, you mentioned it about their goal to be able to attract Gen Z and stuff like that. But specifically when it comes to the Houston market, how important is it for the Big 12 to be able to have a foothold in that Houston market? And is the Houston Cougars, is the University of Houston able to fill that market hole, for lack of a better phrase?
Yeah, I think if you think about it, with just the size and the market that the city of Houston is, with OU and Texas leaving, there's, if you think about it, there's an opportunity there that you need to take hold of that and maybe fill some of that in. And he seemed to really believe that it was important. And I think in terms of if U of H is able to fill that hole, I think men's basketball, absolutely. And you've already seen it. They're looking at them you're looking at the Mexico City game a year from now. And then I think football is yet to be seen. Especially with sort of the fanfare in the recent years, just with football games. In terms of how the stadium has been, hasn't really been packed for a while, and that'll yet to be seen in the immediate future. I don't know. Well, it'll really have to be seen. U of H football needs to be competitive. They need to win. That's what needs to happen to fill that hole.
You know what? I think best case scenario, not only for Houston, but for the Big 12 is, say if Houston has a year like TCU had last year, and let's just say they have that type of year and they make it to the college playoff or even a national championship game. I think not only will that, of course, we know what it'll do for Houston, but for the Big 12, with the size of the market, I think the Big 12 would even pour even more resources into Houston and the city, because Houston could really, if they have that type of initial success, could jump all the way. I don't want to say reach the heights of Texas, because Texas is such a dominant and remarkable program.
And they're so far ahead.
Yeah, in the football head. But I think if they have that immediate success, that Houston is such a big market, such a huge big city. I think you'll hear them start to dominate recruiting. You start to hear so much about Houston and their brand if they were able to reach that type of initial success, not only for Houston, but for the Big 12. I think it would aid the Big 12 just as much as it would as Houston.
Most definitely. And Starns, that's a great point when you look at what men's basketball has been able to establish. And Dayon, you kind of alluded to it too, the support that the conference has given to the men's basketball program. There was a couple times when Brent Yormark specifically mentioned the basketball program at Houston and the level of success that obviously they've been able to achieve. But specifically to me, what stands out when Yormark is really pointing out that program, the basketball program, is how highly he thinks of UH men's basketball. And you mentioned it's the two premier programs when it comes to Kansas and Houston being the two programs that are being showcased in an international game when it comes to the Mexico City game, when it comes to 2024 when they play that non-conference game. If football is able to have that success, Dayon, absolutely, I agree 100%. You'll start seeing a lot of that momentum that when it comes in recruiting, and sky's the limit. The potential, I'm curious, do you guys agree? The potential for Houston in football is through the roof. Now, whether they reach it or not, that's going to be determined in the next season and in the coming seasons.
Absolutely. I mean, it just from a market's perspective and a recruiting perspective, I mean, it shouldn't take a lot to really get the ball rolling for Houston to grow. And however long, whenever that happens, if that happens, where they're able to really get a good season going or get a good stretch going to get that ball rolling, that's yet to be seen.
Yeah, and let's just say they don't reach where TCU reached. Let's just think about to where they reached to, was it the Chick-fil-A Bowl when they beat Florida State a couple years ago? Let's just say They reached to a New Year's Six bowl. I think even like it did when they played Florida State and beat Florida State, the momentum it had then, I think it can have that exact momentum for Houston, but even more. You look at the recruits you got after that, like the Ed Olivers and just all the momentum that came after that. I think if Houston can just reach that level of success and not even mentioning national championship game, I mean, the potential is through the roof. But like Storm just said, they have to win. I mean, you win, the possibilities are limitless, or what Houston program can do and can reach if they actually just start winning.
As we start to wrap things up, Starns, I'm gonna toss it to you. Really an open-ended question. Anything else that you'd like to add that stuck with you overall when it comes to Big 12 Media Day?
I think one of the things I found pretty fun was with the players, and was just how real it felt to them, seeing them. They were really excited. They were all dressed up. They were pretty happy about how they got dressed up as well. But it sort of hit them that this is real. This is a big Big 12 event, and they're part of it. And I think that was one of the things that stuck with me.
Dan, any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I mean, I would kind of echo the same words that Storm just said. I think just for what I'm seeing, the players seem to kind of have I don't want to say a different light about themselves, but they kind of really had a light about themselves, and really it just seemed different versus American Conference Media Days and what they experienced at the Big 12 Media Days. It seemed like just more light in their eyes, more energy, just more everything, and preparing to be in this major conference on a major stage on a week-to-week basis on national TV. No ESPN Pluses, no ESPN 4, 5s, and 6, and all that. I think Houston is really relishing the moment and ready to be a part of this conference and take it by storm.